What's the most difficult thing that you've ever done? When I ask that question, does that take you back to a different time, a different place in your life, maybe a really hard month or a really hard year, or maybe it's even one really hard day? Or is it something that you're going through right now? Is it something that you chose to do or something that you had to do? Is it something that you're proud of? Did you do it by yourself? And was it worth it? I want to ask you a few questions and tell you a little bit about today, about a story that includes something that's extraordinarily difficult, and to the extent that it almost doesn't seem real. It's hard to understand. And if you've been in the church a long time, you might have heard this story probably a lot. And I don't think you've ever quite heard it the way that I'd like to tell you about it today. Or if you haven't heard this before, I think you're in for a real treat. This story, it's exciting, it's confusing, it's challenging, and it's all about the things that we face in life today and what we're supposed to do about it. So I hope you'll stay with me today as we're in 1 Samuel 17, and I hope you're ready because a giant is looming. So I hope you'll stay with me as we talk about a giant, a shepherd, and a battle as we go through David and Goliath. So a little bit of setup for this. This story took place over 2,000 years ago in a place we'd call today the Middle East. And there are two groups of people that you're going to hear mentioned in the story. One of them is the Israelites. And the Israelites were God's chosen people during the Old Testament time. And the other group of people you're going to hear mentioned are the Philistines. And the Philistines were a different group of people, and they had a long series of conflicts, both violent and nonviolent, with the Israelites over a long period of time. And that's where the story jumps in, is war has been declared, and the two armies are about to face each other, and that's where we're going to get started today. So our first section, we're in 1 Samuel 17, verses 4 through 11, and the giant is about to emerge. Verse 4, a champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistines' camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span, and he had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor of bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung over his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me, and if he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. So Goliath is here. And the description of this man, it's unbelievable. If you do the conversions on the measurements list, he stands at nearly 10 feet tall, and he carries nearly 200 pounds of equipment on him. I mean, he's portrayed as unstoppable. I mean, he's so big and so strong, and he has so much armor and equipment that there's no possible way that anybody could take his challenge and come out on top. And of course, you see the response. The Israelites, they're terrified. And if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you might know that the Israelites are terrified even though they were God's chosen people. Even though by this point in their history that God had led them through so many different situations and prevailed them so many times. He led them out of slavery in Egypt. He sent them great prophets to guide them when they went astray. He showed great mercy to them over and over when they turned away from him. But yet, all it takes is for Goliath to come forward, and they're terrified. They're cowering in the face of this seemingly unstoppable figure. Now, it may seem easy for us to look back on those people and say, shouldn't they have been more brave? Shouldn't they have felt different? I mean, they saw all these incredible things. They knew God was with them. I mean, shouldn't have they been able to do it or do something? Well, I'm not so sure, because I think this is actually a really perfect representation of what people are like, and it's exactly what we're like today, if you think about it, because we're terrified of giants all the time. We're terrified of giants all the time. Now, hopefully there's no 10-foot tall murder machines coming to get you actively, but really, we're terrified of giants just like they were. Maybe you're terrified of what you'll see on the news, or what you'll see on social media, or what you'll hear somebody say about what's going on in the world. Maybe you're terrified of having that conversation that you've been dancing around for a while with a friend or with a family member. Maybe you're terrified of relationships, maybe one that's broken or one that you are worried about the state of. Maybe you're terrified of having relationships at all. Maybe you're isolated because you know that you've been hurt in the past, or maybe you've hurt other people in the past. Maybe you're terrified to even try to go to God or to even think about what that even means, because you know how deep and how dark and how ugly our sin is and what people are capable of and what you are capable of. And it's easier to just not think about all that. It's easier to just shove that into some deep, dark corner of your mind and never try to think about that. And whenever it does come up, you just get rid of it as fast as possible. And we're terrified of that giant, aren't we? But just like the Israelites with Goliath, being terrified of the giant doesn't make him go away. Shoving those thoughts that we don't like deep down into the corners of our mind doesn't make it go away. Goliath is there. He walks out, he stands out, he roars at the ancient Israelites and at you today. So what's going to happen? Well, this is where I have to introduce you to the shepherd. And just for the sake of time, I'm going to summarize the next section, but we get introduced to this guy named David. And David he's a normal guy, and it points out that he has 7 older brothers, and the 3 eldest are warriors, and they went with the army. But David didn't go because he had to stay at home and do his job, and he's a shepherd. And it's worth pointing out that at this time, being a shepherd is not a very respectable job. It's not something that gives you a lot of money or respect or anything like that. It's a job where you take care of animals and you lead animals around to where they need to go. It's the type of job you do because that's the opportunities that you have, and that's just the way it is, and that's just what you do. So David gets sent on an errand by his father to go to where the army is and deliver some food and other things to his brothers and see how they're doing, and then just come home. So David goes and he finds it, and he sees and hears Goliath. He comes out and he does his challenge twice a day, and he keeps doing this over and over. And he sees it and he's like, what's going on? And he finds out that Saul, who's the king of the Israelites, he's put out a really big reward if somebody can go kill Goliath. Not if he can kill Goliath, but if somebody else can go kill Goliath. And the reward is you get a huge amount of money, you don't have to pay taxes for a really long time, and you get to marry the king's daughter. Okay, which back then, that would have been like a huge reward. That would have been like you win the lottery unexpectedly, or you get a huge inheritance that you didn't know about. So this would have been a huge reward at this time. And David hears all that, and then one of his brothers starts getting on to him, basically saying that David isn't there for the right reasons, and that he's only there so that he didn't have to do his shepherd duties back home, that he's just there so he can, see some excitement. And then in the midst of all this, Saul, who's the king, he hears about all this going on, and he calls for David to come talk to him. I guess he must have really been raising quite the commotion. So David goes to go speak to Saul, and that's where we're at for our second section. And this is in 32 through 37. Verse 32. David said to Saul, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul replied, "You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man, and he's been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock, I went after it and struck it and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair and I struck it and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." So, do you think it's kind of strange what David is saying here? I mean, here's this 10-foot tall, unstoppable giant guy, and this young shepherd man, not one of the soldiers, but this young shepherd man comes up and he says, "I can do it." And just as a little side note, in the Sunday school version of this story, David often gets portrayed as a child, and that probably isn't true. He was young, but he was definitely an adult, but that's a side note. So this young shepherd man comes up, he says, I can do it. And you think, he's talking about facing his certain death. Goliath is 10 feet tall. And here's this guy who doesn't know anything about combat just walking up, be like, I can do it. He talks about his victory as if it's already happened. Think about it. It's like you ever have a situation, maybe you've really experienced this in your workplace, where maybe there's some kind of huge problem that comes up or something really important breaks and nobody knows what to do about it. That'd be like if the new person came in and said, oh yeah, I know what to do. That just wouldn't make any sense, right? But nonetheless, that's what happens. And want to ask, where do you think the confidence came from for David to make these kind of statements, to have that kind of bravery and confidence to go out and do this? I mean, you could say a lot of things, but what I want to point out is that you notice he doesn't talk about his own strengths and his own accomplishments. He talks about the strength of God and the things that God has already led him through up till that point. It's almost like David is more in line with the promises of God and their Israelites' history with God than everybody else is. You know, the story doesn't say this, but I can't help but wonder if David almost had the mindset of like, have you guys forgotten? Have you guys forgotten what God has done for us for so long? Have you forgotten how he led us out of slavery in Egypt? Have you forgotten how he sent great prophets for us? Have you forgotten how he showed great mercy on us? Have you forgotten the promises of God? Have you forgotten the promises of God as we sit here today? So Saul agrees to let him do it, which is something interesting because we don't hear about anybody else taking up the offer to go fight Goliath. So that means that Saul either really believed him that he could do it, or he just thinks he's crazy enough, like, okay, whatever, let this guy try it and see what happens. And just to summarize the next section, the next thing that Saul does is he gives David some of his gear, his weapons and his armor. He tries to give him stuff to kind of help him succeed, because clearly he doesn't think that whatever he brought with him is good enough. So he says, here, have this equipment. But David tries it and he doesn't like it. And he puts it all off and he doesn't use it. And the thing that I want to point out is that Saul and the Israelites, they didn't have the faith that God was bigger than Goliath. They didn't believe that God was strong enough or that God would show up to get them through this challenge. So he tries to give David stuff to help him win. He tries to give him worldly things to help him succeed. And have you ever had that mindset that if your worldly situation was just different, or if you had more stuff, then things wouldn't be so bad? The kind of mindset of, oh, once this situation with my health clears up, then I'll be okay. Or once this situation, my family blows over, then things will be all right. Or if I had a job that made just a bit more money, then I wouldn't be so stressed. Or maybe if I could just meet the right person or have the right kind of friendships or have the right kind of social network, then maybe things would be okay. But the point that's being made here is that Saul and the Israelites, they weren't putting their faith in the right things. Stuff is not what the ancient Israelites or David or you need. And that's hard because the world tells you need a lot of stuff. The world says, you want to be happy? Buy this. The world says, you want to be happy? Take this, or be around these groups of people, or travel here, or live here. But stuff is not what David or you need. Not that goals like that are necessarily bad in of themselves, but the point is that they were putting their faith in the wrong things when they're putting their faith in things other than God. What David does instead is that he takes his staff and he takes a couple small, smooth rocks from the stream bed and he puts them in his pouch because he has a sling. He uses his own equipment. He uses the things he already had. He uses the things that God had already led him to have in his life. I heard a message a couple weeks ago that I really liked, and the speaker had a line that I really remembered. He said, God does not equip the called. Or God does not call the equipped, He equips the called. Do you see what I mean? God does not call the people who are equipped by worldly means. God equips those that he calls. Saul and the Israelites, they were equipped by worldly standards, but David was called. So, David has his staff and he has his rocks and he's walking up. What's going to happen? Well, now we get to the battle. And we're going to be in verses 41 through 51. I know this is a long section, but stick with me because this is important. Verse 41. Meanwhile, the Philistine, with his shield bearer in front of him, kept coming closer to David. He looked David over and saw that he was a little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. He said to David, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. "Come here," he said, "and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals." David said to the Philistine, "You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcass of the Philistine army to the birds and to the wild animals, and the whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. And all those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands." As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him. Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell down, face down on the ground. So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. Without a sword in his hand, he struck down the Philistine and killed him. David ran and stood over him. He took a hold of the Philistine's sword, and he drew it from its sheath, and after he killed him, he cut off his head with the sword. When the Philistines saw their hero was dead, they turned and ran. Now, this is where the story gets really confusing. This is where it gets difficult. This is brutal and messy and confusing. It kind of makes you wonder, is God okay with this happening? This doesn't seem very Jesus-like for something like this to be happening. Makes you wonder, is God okay with this? I mean, David walks up and with seemingly no difficulty, he whips out his sling and he one-shots Goliath. And just as a side note, slings are actually really scary weapons. Just a little bit history tidbit for you. A person with very little practice can sling a small rock over 100 miles an hour out of one of those things. And David would have had a lot more practice than that. So when it says that it sank into his forehead, that's actually the censored version of what really happened. And then David runs up and he delivers the grisly finishing blow on Goliath with his own sword. And just like that, this unstoppable, unbeatable mountain of a thing is defeated. Now, setting aside the violence of this for a second, maybe this is where the story's lost you a little bit. Maybe this is where the story isn't realistic anymore. And I don't mean in the sense of the violence, but I mean in the sense of, in our lives, it can seem like the giants win the battle more often than not, don't they? Maybe we're not familiar with the experience of just in one hit dealing with this massive problem that we have, and then it's over and dealt with. Maybe for you, it seems like the giant wins the battle more often than not. For us, our giants really do seem unbeatable. And our lives, just like the story, our lives are messy and brutal and confusing and full of sin, and we don't understand why certain things happen that they do. The giants of how we hurt other people and how we get hurt ourselves. The giants of doing things that we know are wrong, but we do it because it just feels good in the moment, or we don't care, or it's just easier. The giants of the big questions of politics and things going on in the world. How with the greed of corporations and other things, there are worldwide systems of sin that we engage with and we keep going just by existing. And just by trying to live the best we can, we perpetuate global systems of evil around the world just by living. What about the giants of the big questions of life, of things like death and what happens after we die? The giants of why is there pain in the world? And why do terrible things happen to people who don't deserve it? This might be the part where you maybe expect me to change to giving some sort of pep talk. about how the giants really can be defeated and you're going to be okay. And we can all smile and walk out of here, but would our lives really change if that were true? Because I'll tell you, probably many of you all know this to be fact already, you actually can't beat the giants. You can't. The giants are too big and they're too strong and they're too imposing and all-encompassing. They're too strong. You can't beat it on your own. And if you've ever tried to change anything major in your life, you know exactly what it feels like to walk up to that battle line and get slapped down every time. Whether that be the sting of addiction or betrayal or broken relationships or just day after day of just grueling facing down that giant in your life. So what are we supposed to do? I'd like to look back to the story and point out two things that I think made David different and give us the example of the application to follow as we go through today. The two things I want to focus on is that David was standing on the promises of God and that David was brave. He was brave enough to go face Goliath. So for the first one, the promises of God. I don't mean this in some kind of cliche, trite, just have faith and things will be okay, or where we just kind of put on a smile and go through things. Have you ever done that? Coming to church on Sunday, or maybe going to dinner with your family, or maybe just walking in the door from work, just trying to put on a smile. Everything's okay. I don't mean it in that cliche sense, but the example of David is that he had a deep understanding of the promises of God. He knew they were true. He'd experienced them. He lived with them. He had a deep understanding that the battle was in God's hands. He had a deep understanding of what the promises of God were at that time. How I mentioned earlier, how they led them out of Egypt, sent them great prophets, and all those things. Well, you might be thinking that what's the promises of God today? That was cool for them back then, if you're watching the movie Prince of Egypt or something, but what's the promise of God today? Well, we're fortunate, much more fortunate today than David was, because the promise of God today that we have is the fulfillment of all his promises in the form of Jesus Christ, who 2,000 years ago came and fulfilled the entire Old Testament. And he came with power and authority to show mercy and to heal and to teach and to renew. That's the promise of God, that Jesus Christ came and he had the ultimate battle, much bigger than this one. He had the ultimate battle and he achieved the ultimate victory. And the scripture says that if you confess him with your mouth and believe in your heart, that he draws close to you and he never leaves you, he never forsakes you, and there's nothing that can take you from his hand. Amen. The promise of Jesus Christ is life to the fullest today and life eternally with him. The promise of Christ is that you can be redeemed, that you can change, that other people can change, that those deep, dark parts of your mind that I talked about earlier, that those can be brought into the light and godfully, in a godly way, confessed and renewed and healed, and he can turn your story from a defeat into a victory through him. The second point, David was brave. He knew the promises of God, but just knowing it and believing it wasn't enough. It had to change how he lived. It had to change who he was. He had to be brave. He knew it was true, but he still had to walk out and be able to face Goliath. He had to say, okay, God, I know the battle is yours, but I still got to go throw the rock. I still got to get ready, and I still got to do what I need to do. It changed his life. How do we be brave in the face of our giants, in things that seem impossible? Maybe you're in the grip of something right now. Maybe your mind is somewhere else right now because there's a giant in your life. How do we be brave in the face of that? There's a lot that could be said, but I think once we have that foundation of understanding those promises of God, it comes down to that we can't be the same as we were before. That's part of the discipleship path. That's part of the path of walking with Christ, is this continual change. It doesn't matter if you've been a Christian for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. It's all part of a continual growing, a continual seeking of discipleship and taking that step to change. In a practical sense, I think a couple examples, it looks like how you communicate with others. It looks like speaking words of peace or curiosity instead of violence or judgment. I think it looks like how you spend your time. I think it looks like prioritizing service and prioritizing fellowship and being intentional about growing with others and sharing with others, as opposed to just mindlessly being entertained or making ourselves overly busy just so that we can say we're doing something. I think it looks like how we feel towards other people, about having minds of compassion versus minds of judgment. So if you stand on the promises of God and be brave to step out towards that giant, you don't know what God's going to do. God can bring down your giants as well. Or maybe he'll redeem them and make them into something we didn't even think could happen. Might not happen in the way that you specifically want it to in that moment that will give you the most worldly outcome or the most worldly success. But God has the power to do that. So, what about you? We read about how a giant emerges 2,000 years ago and in your life right now. Read about or talked about a shepherd who was called, and there was a battle both on that field that day and in your heart right now, where the unstoppable was slain. Does that seem possible to you? What's the hardest thing that you've ever done? Will you choose to stand on the promises of God and be brave for the next one? Will you trust Christ to be bigger than your giant? Let's have a word of prayer. Dear Lord, just want to praise you today for this time that we could be together, and just pray you reach out and touch the hearts of everybody who's here and everybody who couldn't make it. And Lord, seep into our hearts as we go our way that you are the ultimate, the fulfillment of life, the giver of life, that the things that we face in this life, the giants we face in this life, we can't do it alone. We need you, we need your Son, we need your Holy Spirit, we need the love of other believers. We need to make discipleship a priority, to live out your ways in this world today, and then we truly can see giants fall. Lord, I ask a special blessing over everybody here, and just please keep us from sin, evil, and help us to be salt and light to others. Amen.